Let's talk trade. Nigeria, the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration Control, NAFDAC, has disclosed that it's negotiating a bilateral agreement with the government of the United Kingdom through the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy for the export of processed goods made in Nigeria and registered with NAFDAC. Now, this information was provided in a statement by NAFDAC resident media consultant Mr. Olusayo Akintola, quoting Professor Mojisola Adeyeye, which is the agency's Director General, at a meeting in Lagos. The UK government announced earlier this year that it intends to lower tariffs on items imported duty-free from Nigeria, which might assist the nation in increasing exports by 2030. Joining us now to discuss further, Seun Ogundolapo, who is the head of trade and transaction banking at Stanbic IBTC. Seun, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What's your initial thoughts on this deal between NAFDAC and the UK Department of Business and Trade?
All right, morning, Rotos. All right, so in my perspective, this is like formalizing export processing food from Nigeria to UK. I mean, it's going to be of great benefit to Nigeria, to UK, yes, but I see some important points here for the Nigerian economy. Just to mention that the UK Trade and Investment Fact Sheet placed the value of import from Nigeria to 2.8 billion pounds. When you compare the fourth quarter up to quarter 3, 2022, that's like 140% increase above 2021. And that shows an enormous amount of export going on between UK and Nigeria. Now, to come into this deal, facilitating this with NAFDAC, meaning that there's going to be more collaboration and we're going to see that volume grow. And for me, I mean, when you talk about processed food, it means that you are adding value to whatever raw material. Nigeria has always been known to export raw materials, but this is beyond raw materials. So they're going to be getting about 8 times the value of foreign exchange coming into Nigeria as opposed to having just raw materials exported outside Nigeria, which is good. And the fact that, from part of the deal, we know that there's going to be reduced tariff by the UK government on most of this, about 90% of the goods that are coming in from Nigeria. That's another plus. So in my own opinion, it's a fantastic deal.
Well, the fact that they had to make this deal, does this mean that there are processed foods exports falling through the cracks without NAFDAC approval that are being exported? Because, one would have assumed that NAFDAC approval is needed in general for any processed foods that you're exporting.
Look, I'll say yes. But you see, in Nigeria today, a lot of informal trades happen, not just to UK, to anywhere. A lot of informal trades that are not conventional, just package your product and, ship it out, not even in a large scale, but, in a place like UK where they have their structures well formalized and, it's going to be a bit difficult to import or export them on this, maybe on an informal basis where they are unable to upscale, right? So it's going to be a challenge to see such cracks going forward because it's going to be, the purpose of this is to discourage all such informal trade that will lead to goods like that that are not being inspected by NAFDAC falling through the cracks. So that is another plus anyway from this deal that's going to take place between the UK and Nigeria.
The UK government announced in January that it reduced tariffs on, I guess, duty-free goods exported from Nigeria. Can you talk about tariffs and, I guess, as far as them being a possible barrier to trade, but on the other side of the coin, aiding the local economy as these traders that are in the same goods that are being imported from elsewhere, as far as their role and they play?
Okay, so the government, the UK government is aware about the kind of barriers that can happen within trade between them and Nigeria, and to make these goods to move freely between the two countries, they've decided to put this deal in place and also to put some level of tariff to sort of like cushion the effect and allow the Nigerian exporter enjoy the benefit of trading with the UK partners. So I'll give you an example of what is happening in Africa. There's this AfTA initiative, that's African Continental Free Trade, agreement that has been put in place to allow African countries trade with each other and by reducing tariff. I did mention earlier that in UK, the UK government have decided to give some level of tariffs, reduced tariffs, to encourage the success of this deal. Now, that on its own make it good, and formalizing this structure in such a way would, in the long term, you see that the benefit, it's going to be more than what we can comprehend. And I think these are the kind of initiatives that should be encouraged in our trading partners. If the government identify different trading partners in different countries, these are the type of engagement, the kind of deals that should be struck between governments of different countries.
Seun, what about because the UK is one of our largest trading partners. Let's look at capital importation numbers. The UK tops that list. What about, you've mentioned the AfCFTA, so you've prompted my next question. What about intra-Africa trade? Do you see Nigeria brokering this kind of deal with other African nations? How do we boost intra-African trade to levels where we see in North America, Europe, and Asia?
Look, intra-Africa trade, in my opinion, should not be as difficult as we have it today. I had a discussion with someone some time ago who was running business exporting to African countries. And he was explaining the difficulty in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the cost of moving goods between Nigeria and other African countries. That's it's quite difficult. And the same thing from other African countries. He gave me a typical example. Moving goods from Nigeria to somewhere, maybe Ghana or beyond Ghana, is more expensive than to route that same item of import to Europe and back to the country, the final destination in Africa. It's as bad as that. And that has to speak to the level of infrastructure in between the countries and the tariffs. In fact, the major problem is tariffs, because some of these items go on the road, and each border of each country in Africa, there are tariffs you pay, there are taxes you pay. But what AfTA is coming in to do here is to see how that barrier can be broken and negotiate tariffs between the participating countries in Africa so that the inter-Africa trade can be encouraged, and we get to see how we can deal with ourselves. I mean, engage trade within African countries more, and synergize. Africans and African products going within each other, and that also would help to to some extent manage the incidences of access to foreign exchange and lack of foreign exchange within the African countries. Because I must tell you, it's not only Nigeria that is experiencing the difficulties in accessing the foreign exchange, USD and Euro and other currencies.
Seun, I want to also ask you about, I think you already mentioned this, we export mostly raw materials. What kind of manufacturing base and infrastructure do you need to ramp up production of finished goods, which is what the UK, the US, Korea, and the rest are benefiting so much for in foreign exchange?
All right. So I did mention, like you said, that when you have finished goods, you get to, at a minimum, 8 times the value of the raw material you would have exported. Now, what you will need as an exporter is the support of government. And if you recall, sometime last year, about February last year, 2022, the CBN released a policy on RT200. And part of that policy speaks to being able to facilitate trade on behalf of the exporter by supporting them with facilities, value-adding facilities, expansion grants, and things like that. The value-adding facilities has to do with you having your raw material and converting it into finished or semi-finished goods before exporting it, because they know that there is more value in you exporting such. So the government, the CBN, was quite supportive. And as a matter of fact, they were giving rebates to companies who are able to demonstrate the ability to send finished goods out of the country, export it out of the country, and receive export proceeds. So when you receive export proceeds and you sell it to the banks, you get a rebate from the CBN, and that has shown a lot of positive indices, because we've seen an upturn in exports in the country, and a lot of statistics are like that. Now, apart from that, you have grants that are being provided, expansion grant or expansion facilities that are being provided to such companies to help boost their production capacity in supporting the increase in the production of finished or semi-finished goods. So, but one of the things that CBN also focused on with this policy is to see how they can have dedicated export ports. The current ports we have in Nigeria are congested with imports on its own, import items. So there have to be a dedicated export ports, right, where goods can go and easily not get jammed or mingled with the challenges with processing, importing into the country, but exporting through, for example, free trade zones. I think that's an idea that is coming up that we'll be seeing shortly. Exporting through the free trade zone out of Nigeria, and that would help to facilitate. Then, of course, things that are around infrastructure, road infrastructure network that connects the ports to the different locations all around are things that I know the government has in mind in order to support exports in the country.
Excellent stuff. Seun Ogundolapo, Head of Trade, Transaction Banking at Stanbic IBTC. Really appreciate you coming to talk to us about trade and this deal between NAFDAC and the UK to get more processed foods exported out of Nigeria with the NAFDAC seal of approval. Thank you so much for your time.